the last few months have obviously been incredibly challenging for all businesses in a variety of ways, but it has given lots of people cause to stop and think about their green credentials of their business and the impact that it has on the environment. One of the obvious ones is the way people travel to work. When they're not traveling to work, there's an obvious opportunity there, one would have thought, to reduce your personal carbon footprint and then maybe that of the business. So in order to keep that momentum going that has arisen during this period, Ned Harrison from Bee Anglia is now going to talk you through 5 possible ways that you can continue to keep reducing your carbon footprint.
Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. So as he says, I'm from Bee Anglia, so it's Business Energy Efficiency Anglia, but it's Bee Anglia, hence all the bees everywhere. So I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk about ways perhaps you could look at reducing your carbon footprint. We hear a lot of people talking about this today. I'm going to crack straight on because I have a lot to get through. It's quite a big topic, but hopefully it will feed in nicely to some of the things that we've just been hearing about, which I'm hoping I can catch up on later on as well. So thank you. Some people did complete a survey beforehand. It was encouraging to see from that people think the environment is becoming a bigger issue. That may be, of course, because you're people who are coming on to an environment session and therefore you're interested in that anyway, but that does also tally with what we see on a national picture in terms of surveys. And the other big thing that came out that was sort of lack of knowledge and confidence in where you can start. So hopefully I can help a little bit with some of that. So just very quickly to begin in terms of Bee Anglia, so we provide support to SMEs. It's an EU-funded project. So the first thing I should say is that it is a funded project. It will go on being funded. We have our funding for the duration of the project until 2022. Because it's ERDF funded, there are specific exclusions. So we only work with SMEs. And then there are sectoral exclusions as well. This is just in terms of the project. Obviously, any of the suggestions I'm covering here will apply to any business. Hopefully it will be relevant to all businesses. In terms of the specific exclusions, I'm not going to go through that in great detail. If people are looking for support from Bee Anglia, it's something that we have a team of people who can advise you on, and they will be more than happy to walk you through that. So the project does provide grants. We've given away a lot of our grants by this stage already. We've seen very high demand, which is great. Focusing on the highest impact measures and those where the grant money really has a difference. So there are different things that we're supporting, but again, if you've got a specific plan, then the team of advisors can talk you through that. We also provide carbon charter accreditations and other advice for businesses. So both of which I'll come back to a bit later on. I'm going to do a quick run through of some of the main technologies we've supported. Just to come back to, I think, the remarks that Henry made in the introduction. We thought when we went into lockdown, perhaps that we would see a real falling away of some of the interest, and actually we've seen the opposite of that. We've seen more interest over the past 6 months, and I think several things have affected that from what we've heard. So one is that businesses are having that time to step back maybe and look at things. One is perhaps that more generally having a bit more time outside. There was a lot of talk early on in lockdown that people were appreciating the clearer skies and I mean in a fairly horrible time in lots of ways, that there were positives to be taken from connection with nature and things. And then the other one is that we're seeing a big demand from customers, particularly in some sectors, that they want businesses to be showing that they care about the environment, so taking action on that. In terms of the measures that we've supported to date, it's a lot. There's a big spread, so this highlights really that there's an awful lot of things you can do. The most common one there has been LED lighting. This is now something that stacks up very well on its own. We tend not to support that anymore as a result. Otherwise, solar panels, insulation, more efficient machinery. We have seen a bit of a trend over the past year, a bit of a shift in that, so that the most commonly supported technology now, that's solar panels, and then we've also seen growth in things like electric vehicles and battery storage, that sort of the coming technologies. We tend to see those. Again, I'll come back to all of these. I'm going to skip past these examples because I think we have not that much time to get into the nitty-gritty of what businesses can actually do. But just before we do that, I wanted to take one moment to step back and sort of think about why we're talking about this. Obviously, there are cost benefits and so on, but really at the bottom of it all, and I'm sure everybody by now is more than aware of the basic picture that the rate at which we're burning fossil fuels and also deforesting and so on is leading to global warming that is causing significant problems. There's this agreement in place from the Paris Agreement to try and keep warming to as near to 1.5 degrees as possible, and you can see from that is a threshold that we are going to cross. This graph you can see shows it's a threshold we're going to cross very, very shortly without fairly radical action. So as a result of that, we've seen things like the UK government adopting a net zero target by 2050, which is sort of just about consistent with that 1.5 degree target. Suffolk and Norfolk county councils and many of the district councils have set targets of net zero by 2030. That means that you reduce your emissions very significantly, and the small amount that's left is offset perhaps by tree planting or so on. Can't, unfortunately, plant trees to get out of this. It is about reducing emissions primarily. So the 2050 target, that's a very real challenge. By way of comparison, that's about a 7% reduction needed each year if you did it in a linear way. 7% is roughly what we think we might have achieved globally this year. Obviously, this year is not the way that we want to achieve that reduction. That's through people not flying and not driving and less manufacturing and so on. And clearly that's in no sense a solution. So I think it highlights that the solution that we need to see is about structural change and about technological change. The good news, though, is that most of that technology, the net zero is achievable on technology that exists. It's a struggle, but it's doable. This is very important because I'm going to skip through this because I think probably people know it anyway, but because there is a real difference. The more warming we see, the worse the impacts are, and the closer we are to some of those thresholds that potentially bring us real problems. It is, of course, a global problem. It's also a real problem for us here in Suffolk and Norfolk. This table is from the UK Committee on Climate Change, highlights some of the issues that we see in the UK, of which, of course, flooding is one that will be very real for us here. That's the scale of the challenge. In terms of where businesses sit, this is often something that comes up as being quite controversial within decarbonisation debates. Whose responsibility is it? Is it government? Is it big business? Is it consumer choice? You see these debates playing out an awful lot. Government is criticised for telling people what they ought to do, or protesters are criticised for driving to a demonstration, so all of these sorts of issues about whose responsibility it is. I guess one of the nice things about net zero is it simplifies that an awful lot. Basically, it's everybody's responsibility. We all have to do what we can. So my very simplified energy system here, there's the big grids, which in this case is the thermal power station, but that could also be car refueling networks or the gas grid or whatever. It's very hard for us to influence. And then there's a portion of use that we have that we can control from our house or our business. And it's not only electricity, of course, it's also about travel and waste and the products we consume. So very simplified idea, but this is to get the idea of how we all fit into this picture in terms of the strategy for achieving net zero. It is about those big system changes. So the grid goes to renewables. This is very largely, or happened to a very significant degree already. I was looking just this morning, coal was at about 1% of our electricity, whereas it used to be the largest amount. And that has largely been displaced by renewables as well as gas. But then there's also the changes we can make, which is really what I'm going to talk about here in terms of moving to more efficient materials, perhaps not traveling or tackling what we do with our waste. So this is going to be a simple approach, but I'm going to run through some of the most common things that we see, most common things that we get asked about. Hopefully I have a bit of time for questions at the end if I skate through this very quickly. The first thing is that this is the wrong way to be doing it. We shouldn't be talking about these are the things you need to do. You need to be looking at what works for your business. If you're in a haulage business or renting an office, then obviously the solutions are going to be very different. So we always say the first step, understand where your impacts are. We have a very simple carbon footprint tool on our website. The link's there at the bottom. This is all free to use. You can see you just need to know the figures for the energy you use, and it will give you an idea of how that breaks down. This is, then you can look at it. So it does buildings. It would do travel. You can look at the various different headings for that. It's fairly straightforward. It allows you to make simple assumptions if you don't have all of the detail to hand, to give you a rough overview of it. And then at the end, we'll present you with a nice little, this is your number for what your carbon footprint is. Increasingly, this is something that we're seeing that is expected in some procurement as well. So it's worth looking to. This might be a typical carbon footprint for a small micro business. The average business we work with, average SME, is probably about 50 tons, but some will be much larger than that. It very much depends on the size and on what you do. The other thing I guess to say here is it gives a handy way of showing where your impacts are. So from this example, you could see that your building, that's where most of your energy is. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the first thing to start. It might be that those flights could very easily be replaced by a webinar or something, but it does just show you perhaps the things that are worth beginning with or to look at first. People sometimes struggle with this. I'm going to skate through some quick tips on this. So the first thing is that you're only really doing this for yourself. It's not really to please anybody else. And if at the end of it, you've got a number because you feel it was something you had to do, then probably you're not doing it right. It ought to be giving you useful information. So make sure it is useful to you. If there's an element that you can't control, perhaps you're in a rented property, it's a bit difficult, then it's not worth spending lots and lots of time tracking down all the detail on that. Focus on the things that will be relevant to your business. Understand what it means. If your footprint has dropped a lot, that might be great. Perhaps it's your fantastic switch off campaign and all your staff got behind it and that was great. Or maybe actually it's because there was a very mild winter and there's just less need for heating, or a global pandemic and nobody was in your office at all for several months. So just, it's not just a number, it's about a tool to understand things, and we are taking that from it. Make sure you track the units as well as just the carbon, because as the grid changes, so your carbon footprint will change from the same energy use, and we'll think this is fantastic, all our footprints are going down, and it's not really something that we're doing. So again, make sure you understand what is driving any changes, and that's the way also it's useful in terms of picking up areas that you can save energy on. Obviously, the better it is, do make assumptions if you need to, but the closer it is to reality, the more useful it will be to you. But it's the key thing is to start with something, get an idea of where your impacts are, and make sure that you know that, rather than being put off by the whole thing seeming too onerous. So start with a very simple thing. You can always refine and improve it later on. We recommend that this is something you should look at least on an annual basis. It will depend on your business. Again, there may be parts that you want to monitor more closely, but obviously remember, again, it's useful, it's not an end in itself. We strongly recommend that once you have your footprint, you adopt a target and then try and stick to that. That could be a target of a flat reduction or a reduction of a certain amount per unit of turnover. So maybe your footprint goes up because your business is growing, but that's obviously a good thing. So you don't want to sort of be penalized by that. Again, understand it, make sure you know where those figures are coming from. It is only a rough tool. Do have a look around. There's plenty. I mean, this is support that we use to provide. We're not providing it. Hopefully we will again, but would do an on-site audit. It is something you can do yourself. Just walk around and look for those opportunities. And remember, of course, that there are things that won't be captured in your footprint. So the online tool I showed won't look at the things that you purchase or how you handle your waste or various other topics like that. There are other tools available that do look at some of these things. Once you have your footprint, you now know the areas that you can focus on. I think energy efficiency is sometimes overlooked. People think we can't sort of energy efficiency our way to net zero. This is true. Equally, we won't get to net zero without very significant energy efficiency improvements. So it's definitely the first place to look, see if there are things that you could just do, not just throw that energy away. I like this idea of negawatts that came from the Rocky Mountain Institute, that if you perhaps if we could measure energy savings in that way, if we counted them as an asset in the way that we count a new wind farm as an asset, people might pay a bit more attention to it. Some of the technologies that we've seen most over the past few years come under this heading. LED lighting, very good technology now, much more efficient. Would really recommend it in most situations. If you're dealing with compressed air or something, that's likely to be a key one. But there's all sorts of ways of looking at this in terms of where you could implement that. I was going to look very quickly at one of the ones that we see commonly, because decarbonising heat is a real challenge for a lot of people. And air source heat pumps are a key way of doing that. So when I was told how they worked, I was always told that it's like a fridge in reverse. That's what everyone says. I never knew how a fridge worked either, but anyway, they do work. My understanding is essentially that they take the heat on the left of that diagram there, in the evaporator, and that's then goes through the compressor. So even very low grade heat, they will work even in the middle of winter. If it's minus 20 degrees outside, they can provide heat. They compress that heat. In the condenser on the right, it goes out. You can also have ground source heat pumps or water source heat pumps. They're a bit more expensive to implement. They are more efficient. If you have lots of space, a ground source heat pump might be the solution for you. If you happen to have a lake at hand, then water source perhaps. We've supported several of these. This is one example. You can see this is an air-to-air heat pump, so that it's that unit on the top will then be the heater. It's also therefore doubles as air conditioning in summer. You can also get air-to-water heat pump, in which case there's government funding available for that, which there isn't for air-to-air. Payback here this is quite long. Actually, we tend to see slightly shorter payback for this, but I've not wanted to sort of overemphasize it. It does take a while to pay back. We did one, some replacing electric heating in a museum, that paid back in about 5 years. We calculated that actually it was going to cost them more, but they still went ahead because they wanted to move off gas. So it does depend on what the motivation is and the situation is there. If you've got electric heating already, the financial case is likely to be stronger. There's lots of providers out there, well worth talking to them if you're looking at heating. Transport, likely to be a big factor, often the biggest factor, particularly for businesses around here. Again, I've tried to highlight that sometimes people think maybe this is really about electric vehicles, but there are alternatives. Obviously, people getting much more used to video conferencing. If you have a lot of fleet, then vehicle tracking and driver training is well worth looking into, and there is generally funding available for driver training. So that's something that's worth looking into. The hydrogen vehicles, perhaps unlikely to be the solution yet for many people, but it may well be coming, particularly for larger vehicles. It's sort of a developing low carbon technology. But of course, the one that most people think about is cars. The electric car has moved forward at an incredible pace over the past few years. All electric vehicles have, so there's just a selection of sort of standard family type cars here. All of those will do, well, most of them will do 200 to 300 miles. I think that top central one actually is the Skoda, which is a little bit under, is more like the old Zoe, does about 160. The new Zoe will again do 250 miles on one charge. And the charging network is expanding rapidly. We have support available for that in Suffolk. Look up plug-in Suffolk if you're looking at potential for installing new charging. It's not only cars, of course, it's all sorts of vehicles, actually, including vehicles that just a few short years ago they thought could never be electrified, and we're already seeing that. Some of these already exist, so there's some fascinating stuff that John Deere are doing around electric farm vehicles, including that red one is an autonomous electric farm vehicle. But also, so that Steno, the hybrid ferry they run, is hybrid. We wouldn't recommend hybrid under most circumstances, but for a ferry, electric won't cut it, but it does mean that they have zero emissions in port, so that's quite a significant step for them, obviously. The one that we see most interest in is vans. Again, the technology has moved forward a lot. There's some examples of them here. So they will do 1 to 200 miles. That the British Gas have invested in 1,000 Vauxhall vans. That's got a range of 1 to 200 miles, I should say. And again, that's fully loaded for many businesses doing local deliveries. This will be a very realistic solution, like Yum Yum Tree Fudge, who I thoroughly recommend on all levels. They are a Carbon Charter accredited business. They use electric deliveries. They have solar panels, which they can use to charge the electric vans. So they do 15,000 miles of delivery powered just by the sun from their own panels. So I think that's a really fantastic example of what can be achieved there. I'm skipping through these. I'm very conscious of time. So we've looked at sort of cutting the efficiency and looking at energy efficiency in your business, looking at travel, looking at generate your own electricity. Again, this is something that we've seen increasing interest in. Payback, again, it will vary. It's well worth getting a few quotes, as it is for all of these things. The market is fairly developed and I think fairly robust and reliable as well. It's worth looking for businesses that do have accreditations, which under renewables they all should. And if you do that, you ought to get a reasonable estimate from them. Take a couple of quotes. We tend to see payback ranging from about sort of 5 to 10 years. Larger schemes will have shorter payback slightly. If you use a lot of electricity, if you're a manufacturing company or so on, it will tend to have shorter payback as well. Battery storage, we are seeing a lot more interest in it now. It's still probably not for everybody. The payback is a bit longer with that. So I mean, I think where we tend to see the interest from that is businesses that are really interested in going very low carbon or off-grid altogether, or have particular concerns about resilience issues, and battery technology can be very useful for that. Just as an example of that, the bottom right display, that kind of green graph, is a measure for how the Powerwall is being used. So where it dips below zero at that spike on the left there, you can see it being charged up by the solar panels. And then it's used at points during the day when, I guess that might be electric vehicles charging those spikes, and then you can see it being used sort of in the evening to provide the low level of electricity needed. And I'm going to run on to the final topic. So promotion, I think this often gets let out, and I think this is a part of the whole thing. People see promotion sometimes as it smacks of greenwash. There's famous examples. BP, supposedly, BP, when they rebranded as Beyond Petroleum, the story goes that they spent more on rebranding than they did on renewables that year. So there is skepticism about this, quite correctly, but it is well worth looking at, because if you manage to do all of the things we talked about and lots of other measures, and you get your business carbon level right down to zero, that's great, that's fine, highly commendable, but it is about getting everybody there. It is about changing that system and moving others with us. So if you're not highlighting to other businesses how this is possible and that the things that you can do are really achievable, then you're missing one of the biggest impacts you can have. And if your business is already quite green and you haven't promoted it, you've just quietly got on with it because it's operating, I would strongly recommend that you take some time to consider how you can do that. It's increasingly becoming of interest for procurement as well. So We've seen Tesco recently have said that they want carbon reduction from across their supply chain. We've been working with the co-op locally. Suffolk County Council is looking at asking about this in procurements. So we do provide a tool to support this as well. So the Carbon Charter, we've done something over 550 accreditations across Norfolk and Suffolk. Looks at businesses, accredits them at 3 different levels depending on the stage they're at in terms of are they, which is very much the stages I've talked through here, are they monitoring and planning to reduce, are they making real reductions, and then are they championing the messages, are they kind of exemplar green business? We also have a website which is available to everybody, has lots of resources including information on all of these technologies and many more. Other accreditations are available, I should say that. Ours is, of course, the best, but it is designed very much for Suffolk and Norfolk SMEs, so it's simpler in that sense, and locally recognised, and it does also then introduce you to an active network of businesses, so you can sort of share those ideas around it. And I'm only got about 5 minutes left, so I did want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So I'm sorry I've had to skate through what is a fairly massive topic. Hopefully some of that's made some sense. We do have some events ourselves coming up. Again, they're listed on our website. If you have any interest in those, so Hockerton Housing is an exemplar low carbon housing project. It's a really interesting opportunity to see what they've done. And then Councillor Richard Rout of Suffolk County Council will be talking about what we're looking at doing through the council's work, and the details are there. If you need any further information on the project, then do get in touch. Otherwise, I'm not sure whether we've had any questions.
Hi. Ned, can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Good, hi. Well, I haven't got questions coming up, but I've got a lot. There are questions here that I've already got that I'd like to catch.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that.
Put me on the spot.
Particularly, yeah. Because this is something that with my own business I've looked into, and it's quite a thorny issue, and there are lots of things about it to do. I'd quite like to just ask you about skepticism, because I, for instance, a year ago trialed electric cars for myself and also vans for business, and I rented one for a period of time. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and then the more I read about it, it turns out that I just saw a statistic that said you could drive your electric car for something like 10 years, and because of the CO2 used to produce the battery, your saving is going to be negligible, or in fact not even exist. So it seems very difficult that every time you want to try and take steps forward enthusiastically and genuinely, there's always something come back and go, oh no, actually it's not as good as you thought.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and it applies not just to electric cars, but to all sorts of technologies. And we've seen it across, I mean, it's a version, I guess, of the argument that people had about wind turbines, which in the early days, people thought this is magic. We get carbon-free electricity from wind. And then there's issues about birds and disturbing natural environments and so on. So the simple answer is that in a sense, you're right. There is no absolutely perfect answer. But on the other hand, these technologies have been thoroughly researched. Electric cars are better. I mean, ideally, in terms of having zero impact, we wouldn't travel around at all. But that brings obviously other problems. So assuming that we do need to get about, which we have to, electric cars are much better. They're already under the current grid greener on a life cycle basis than a petrol or diesel car. And obviously the big advantage of electric is that as year on year the grid becomes lower carbon, they become greener and greener. It's not perfect, and there are terrible problems associated with the batteries and so on, but it is a technology in its infancy, so we're seeing rapid developments around that, which Tesla had an announcement just last week that will move that forward significantly, I think.
Right. Okay, because that's another issue, is the grid. That there are all these issues about where you're getting the power from for this whole new electric fleet. Say it were to happen. Well, it will happen eventually, I'm sure. This other thing that I've seen where you can shop around to change to greener suppliers. and it turns out that they're not greener at all because they've bought their license. You know,
Yeah,
does that make sense to what I'm saying?
It does make sense. I didn't touch on this. People do ask about that. It seems very tempting. You can buy a green energy tariff, and there you go. You don't need to worry about your carbon footprint. Unfortunately, like most things that seem just too good to be true, that doesn't really work. There are decent green tariffs out there. I mean, I have a green tariff, and I think that's worth it. But it's worth looking into them. And the key question is, how much money do they invest in greening the grid rather than just reallocating the green electricity that is already there? But definitely, I mean, go for a green tariff. I wouldn't say no to that. It's just, it's only a fairly small step, so it's not a substitute for taking further action.
Okay, and thinking a bit further about that, the last two Norfolk Enterprise Festivals have been fantastic presentations from people around here who with solar power and battery power, people who are business based in the region. And I got into thinking about putting my business is a shop in the centre of Norwich, and it's an old building and it's not my building, and I can't put solar panels on it because they won't let me. But would I be able to, either through you or find a way of getting some sort of grant to help a business put solar panels somewhere, even if it's not on their business site, that are going to be part of their business green package?
So, I mean, in a sense, that's what the better of the green tariffs do, that you're paying for renewables to be installed elsewhere that then get allocated to you, as opposed to the green tariffs that take renewables already there and allocate them to you, which is really moving us forward. To be honest, I have told Matt Simons there's not an area I know a huge amount about, but there are discussions around that kind of collective network. So we have seen it on some business parks and things where people who don't have space for renewables can share that with others, and you get a kind of micro grid developing in a certain area. So yeah, it's not something we've seen a lot of here, but I'm sure it is something that we will see over the next 10, 20 years, yes.
It's fascinating. The promotion thing as well, because that's something I've always thought that maybe in a very British way, we just get on and do the right thing. We don't need to shout about it. But actually,
absolutely
it's really
right,
impressive
we do.
To see. Yeah. But to understand exactly why we should be doing that is very useful. Thank you very much, Ned. That's brilliant. And I hope that all of you, as I will be going to the BEE website to checking out more of all of that.